The silence in their home was a living thing. It had weight and texture, a smothering quality that had settled over the pristine, minimalist furniture Liam had once loved. He sat on the edge of their Eames lounge chair, a piece he'd bought with the first significant bonus from his architectural firm, and stared at the polished concrete floor. The words he had spoken only an hour before still hung in the air, a toxic vapor that choked the life from the room. "It's over, Sarah. The Harrison project, it fell through. We were over-leveraged. The firm is insolvent. It's all gone." He had delivered the lines with the rehearsed finality of a death sentence. He had watched her face, a carefully composed canvas of modern beauty, as the information processed. He saw not the flicker of fear for them, for their shared life, but the cold, calculating dread of a status-conscious woman watching her stock portfolio plummet. There was a brief, theatrical hand-to-her-mouth gesture, a murmured, "Oh, Liam," that lacked any genuine warmth. It was the kind of sympathy one offers a stranger who has dropped their groceries. Now she was in the bedroom, the door slightly ajar. She thought he was in his study, drowning his sorrows or shredding documents. Instead, he was here, in the heart of the life he had built, listening to its foundations crack. He heard the soft, rapid tapping of her thumb on her phone screen, followed by the hushed tones of a call. He didn't need to guess who it was. It was always her mother. "Mom?" Sarah's voice was a strained whisper, stripped of the performative sympathy she had offered him. This was her true voice. This was the unvarnished reality. "It's happened. It's exactly as you said it would." A pause. Liam held his breath, his knuckles white where he gripped the chair's leather arm. He could almost hear the smug, reptilian voice of his mother-in-law, Eleanor, on the other end. "Worse," Sarah continued, her voice breaking with a frustration that felt far more genuine than her earlier sadness. "He's just sitting out there, like a ghost. He lost everything. The Harrison account, the firm, all of it. Years of work, gone. Poof." Another pause, this one longer. Liam could picture Sarah pacing the antique Persian rug in their bedroom, a rug her mother had insisted was a necessary investment. I know. You warned me. You and Marcus both said he was flying too close to the sun. A boutique firm? It was always a risk. It was never stable, not like our family's business." Liam's heart, which he had thought was a block of ice, began to beat with a slow, hot, painful rhythm. He had known, of course. He had suspected. But to hear the betrayal articulated so cleanly, so clinically, was like a surgeon's scalpel sliding between his ribs. "What am I supposed to do now?" Sarah's voice rose in pitch, a hint of panic creeping in. "We're tied to this failure, Mom. Our name, my reputation. We just hosted the fundraiser here last month. Everyone saw this place. They saw him as a success. Now what? Am I supposed to show up at the club and tell everyone my husband is a failure? That we have to sell the house?" There it was. Not, "We lost our home," but "We have to sell the house." Not, "How will we survive?" but "What will people think?" The words hammered into him, each one a nail in the coffin of the love he had believed in. He had engineered this test, this controlled demolition of his life, hoping, praying he would be proven wrong. He had laid a trap for their judgment, and they had walked right into it, blind and arrogant. What they didn't know was that the trap wasn't for him, it was for them, and it had just snapped shut. Within a week, their entire world, built on the brittle scaffolding of status and wealth, would be brought to its knees. And he, the ghost in the lounge chair, would be the one holding the hammer. Before we go any further, I just want to say thank you for being here. If you're enjoying this story already, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's get back to it. 6 years earlier, the world had been a different color. It had been painted in the warm, optimistic hues of a future Liam believed was a shared masterpiece. He'd met Sarah at a gallery opening. He was there to appreciate the art. She was there to be seen. He was a junior architect then, full of ideas that were grander than his portfolio. She was the daughter of the formidable Eleanor Vance, matriarch of Vance Holdings, a regional real estate empire built on shrewd, often ruthless, acquisitions. Their courtship was a whirlwind of expensive dinners and society events. Liam, with his quiet confidence and sharp intellect, was a novelty. He wasn't from her world of inherited wealth and cynical transactions. He spoke of buildings as if they had souls, of creating spaces that could elevate the human spirit. Sarah seemed captivated by his passion. "You're a poet in concrete and steel," she'd once told him, her eyes shining over a candlelit dinner. He'd believed her. When he proposed, he did it on the half-finished rooftop of a building he was helping to design, the city lights twinkling below them like a fallen constellation. He gave her a simple, elegant ring, its value in its craftsmanship, not its carat weight. She'd said yes. Her family's approval was conditional. Eleanor and Sarah's brother Marcus had appraised him with the same cool detachment they might a property listing. He could see the calculations in their eyes. His education was good, his breeding acceptable, but his finances were aspirational. An architect, Eleanor had said during their first formal meeting, drawing the word out as if it were a slightly distasteful hors d'oeuvre. She sat in a wingback chair in her cavernous living room, a room so perfectly decorated it felt like a museum exhibit. It's a respectable profession, quaint even, but not exactly a path to significance. "I believe creating things of lasting beauty has significance, Mrs. Vance," Liam had replied calmly, meeting her gaze without flinching. Marcus, a younger, cruder version of his mother, had snickered. "Beauty doesn't pay the bills, Liam, or at least not the kind of bills we're used to." He ran Vance Holdings' development arm, a man who saw skylines not as poems, but as profit margins. Sarah had been his defender then. "Leave him alone, Marcus. Liam is brilliant, you'll see. He's going to build his own firm, and it's going to be the most respected in the city." And he had. For 5 years, Liam had poured his lifeblood into sterling design. He'd started with small renovations, poring over every detail with an artist's obsession. His reputation grew. He hired a small, dedicated team. They began winning larger contracts, their work praised for its innovative blend of functionality and grace. He was the underdog, the small firm making waves in a sea of corporate sharks, and he loved it. Sarah loved the fruits of it. She loved the house in the prestigious neighborhood, the magazine features on their home, the invitations to exclusive events that came addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Sterling. She loved being the wife of the brilliant, up-and-coming architect. But through it all, the condescension from her family remained, a low, constant hum beneath the surface of their lives. At family gatherings, Marcus would clap him on the back a little too hard. "Still playing with your little blueprints, Liam? We're closing on the downtown tower next month. Real money. You should come play with the big boys sometime." Eleanor's digs were more subtle, delivered with a serene smile. "It must be so creatively fulfilling to design a single-family home, Liam. So intimate. I do admire your commitment to the craft." The implication was clear. His work was small, a hobby compared to their grand enterprise. Through it all, Liam carried a small, simple object in his pocket, a single, unadorned brass key. It didn't belong to their house, or his office, or any lock he used daily. It was a key to a dream, a plan he had been quietly cultivating for years. Sometimes during a particularly cutting remark from Eleanor or a dismissive wave from Marcus, he would slide his hand into his pocket and feel its cool, solid weight. It was a silent promise to himself, a promise of a future they couldn't see, a strength they would never comprehend. The real test, the seed of his devastating plan, had been planted a year ago. He had landed the initial consultation for the Harrison project, a massive, city-redefining commission to design a new corporate headquarters for Harrison Global, a tech giant. It was the kind of project that could catapult a firm like his into the stratosphere. He'd told Sarah about it, his voice electric with excitement. Her response had been telling. Harrison Global? Liam, that's Vance Holdings territory. Marcus has been trying to get a meeting with them for a year. Are you sure your firm can handle that? It might be better to pass the lead to them. For a finder's fee, of course. It would be good for the family. He had looked at her, truly looked at her, and seen for the first time not a supportive partner, but an extension of her family's ambition. It's my lead, Sarah, he had said, his voice colder than he intended. My firm is more than capable. He won the preliminary contract, but in that moment, he realized that his success, if it became too great, would be a threat to her family's ego. And he began to wonder, if faced with a choice between his success and her family's pride, where her loyalty would truly lie. Worse, what if he failed? Would she be his partner in hardship or a critic in his downfall? So he began to build two things at once. In public, he worked tirelessly on the Harrison project, his team pushing the boundaries of architectural design. In secret, he began laying the groundwork for his test. He created a parallel set of financials. He consulted with lawyers and accountants, not to build a company, but to stage its perfect, believable collapse. He knew it was a drastic, perhaps even cruel, experiment, but he had to know. He had to see the unvarnished truth of the life he had built and the woman with whom he had built it. He had to know if the foundation was solid rock or just shifting sand. The sound of Sarah ending her call jolted him back to the present. The bedroom door opened fully. She walked out, her face a mask of weary resignation. She looked at him, still sitting in the chair, and sighed. My mother is concerned, she said, as if this were a revelation. I'm sure she is, Liam replied, his voice flat. She thinks maybe we should come and stay at the estate for a while, until we figure things out. It would be less embarrassing than staying here while the foreclosure signs go up. Embarrassing. The word hung in the air between them, another ghost in the silent room. Liam looked at his wife, at the beautiful stranger she had become, and felt a profound, aching sorrow. The test was underway, and everyone was failing spectacularly. The day after his announcement, the atmosphere in the house shifted from tense silence to a chilling, transactional coldness. Sarah moved through the rooms, not like a wife in a shared home, but like an executor cataloging the assets of a deceased relative. She didn't ask Liam how he was feeling, or what his plans were, or how they might face this together. Instead, she spoke of logistics, her voice crisp and efficient. I've made a list of the more valuable art pieces, she said, tapping a stylus on a tablet as she stood in the living room. The gallery that sold us the triptych has a consignment program. We'll lose a percentage, but it's faster than an auction. Liam watched her from the kitchen doorway, a mug of coffee growing cold in his hands. Sarah, he began, his voice raspy, maybe we should talk about this first. She looked up, her brow furrowed with impatience. Talk about what, Liam? There's nothing to talk about. The money is gone. These things are all we have left to liquidate. We need to be practical. Practical. It was the word she and her family used to justify any action, no matter how emotionally barren. It was the shield they held up against messy things like empathy and loyalty. I'm not talking about the art, he said, keeping his voice level. I'm talking about us. She let out a short, humorless laugh. Us? Liam, us was predicated on a certain trajectory, a partnership. Right now there's no firm, there's no income, there's no trajectory. There's just a massive hole where our future was supposed to be. Let's deal with the hole first, then we can talk about us. It was a devastatingly honest admission. Their marriage wasn't a union of souls, it was a business merger, and he had just defaulted on his end of the deal. This was the first true humiliation, not the loss of a fictional business, but the loss of a real marriage, laid bare in the cool light of day. He felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, but he forced it down. Patience. The plan required patience. Every cold word, every dismissive gesture was another piece of evidence, another grievance for the list he was compiling in his mind. "All right, Sarah," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "You're right. Let's be practical." He spent the rest of the day in his study. To her, it must have looked like the pathetic last stand of a defeated man. He sat amidst his architectural books and rolls of blueprints, the relics of a dead career. She saw him on the phone, his voice low and somber, and assumed he was negotiating with creditors or breaking the news to former employees. In reality, his conversations were of a very different nature. "Daniel, it's Liam," he said quietly into his phone, his back to the door. Daniel was his lead structural engineer. "How's the revised load-bearing model for the atrium looking?" "Excellent. And the sourcing for the electrochromic glass? Have we locked in the supplier from Germany?" "Good. I want zero compromises on this." He hung up and immediately dialed another number. "Jessica, hi. I need you to quietly move another block of capital from the secondary account into the holding LLC we created for the Harrison build-out. Let's keep it discreet. As far as the world is concerned, Sterling Design is a ghost ship." He was a ghost, but not in the way Sarah thought. He was a ghost in his own life, silently orchestrating a future she couldn't even begin to imagine. He reviewed the final renderings for the Harrison Tower, a magnificent, soaring structure of glass and steel that seemed to defy gravity. It was his masterpiece. The fictional failure he'd presented to Sarah was based on losing this project. The reality was that Mr. Harrison had not only approved the design, but had expanded the scope of the project by 40%, making it one of the largest private construction ventures in the state's history. Sterling Design wasn't insolvent. It was about to become an industry titan. He had created a separate corporate entity, Apex Constructors, to handle the massive undertaking, shielding it from the collapse of Sterling Design. It was a complex web of legal and financial maneuvering designed for one purpose: to create an unshakable illusion of failure. The key in his pocket felt heavier that day. It was the key to a penthouse apartment he had already purchased in a downtown building, a place with a panoramic view of the site where the Harrison Tower would soon rise. It was his ark, waiting for the flood he had summoned to recede. That evening, Sarah announced, "My mother has invited us for dinner tomorrow. She thinks it's important we present a united front." Liam knew what it was. It wasn't about a united front. It was a summons. He was being called to the seat of power to be officially judged. "Of course," he said with a small, tired nod. "Whatever you think is best." Her eyes softened for a fraction of a second. It might have been pity. "Just try to look presentable, Liam. Don't give them any more reason to, you know." He knew. "Don't look as broken as you've made me. Don't embarrass me with your grief." He nodded again, the quiet, compliant husband. Inside, the architect was reviewing his own blueprints. The design for their downfall was proceeding perfectly. Every detail was falling into place. The humiliation was a necessary, calculated stress test on the structure of their lives. And the cracks were showing exactly where he had predicted they would. The Vance family estate was less a home and more a declaration of dominance. A sprawling neo-Georgian mansion set on 50 acres of manicured land, it was designed to intimidate. As Liam drove their car, a car he knew Sarah was already mentally appraising for its resale value, up the long, winding driveway, he felt the familiar weight of their judgment settle upon him. Sarah sat silently in the passenger seat, not looking at him. She had spent 2 hours getting ready, her attire a carefully chosen armor of designer labels. She looked like a woman attending a funeral for a wealthy, unloved relative. They were greeted at the door not by family, but by a housekeeper who took their coats with an air of solemnity. Eleanor and Marcus were waiting for them in the grand library, a room paneled in dark mahogany and lined with leather-bound books that Liam knew had never been opened. A fire crackled in a fireplace large enough to stand in. It was a scene of immense wealth and zero warmth. Liam, Sarah, Eleanor rose from her chair, a queen greeting subjects who had disappointed her. She was a tall, unnervingly poised woman whose smile never quite reached her cold, blue eyes. She kissed Sarah's cheek, then turned to Liam, offering not a hug or a handshake, but a critical, head-to-toe assessment. "You look tired, Liam." "It's been a difficult few days, Eleanor," he said, his voice even. Marcus, who had been swirling a brandy snifter, didn't even bother to stand. He smirked from his leather armchair. "Difficult? I'd call it a catastrophe, wouldn't you? I heard the news on the wire. Sterling design. Kaput. I have to say, Liam, I'm not surprised." Sarah shot her brother a look, but it lacked any real force. It was the token protest of an accomplice. "It was a calculated risk that didn't pay off," Liam said, refusing to be baited. He stood in the center of the room, feeling like a defendant in a courtroom. "There's no such thing as a calculated risk when you're playing with other people's futures, Liam," Eleanor said, her voice like chipped ice. "You had employees. You had a wife. You had a responsibility to our family's name, which you've now dragged through the mud." "My business failure is a personal matter, Eleanor. It doesn't affect the Vance name," Liam countered. Marcus laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Doesn't it? Sarah is a Vance. When her husband's company goes belly up, it reflects on all of us. People talk. They wonder if she made a poor investment. They wonder if our judgment is slipping." This was the core of it. Not concern for his well-being, not sorrow for his loss, but fury that his failure had tarnished their brand. This was the second and far more public humiliation. They were dressing him down in their ancestral hall of power, making him feel small and reckless. He let them. He absorbed the insults, the condescension, the barely concealed glee. He cataloged every word. Dinner was an excruciating affair. He was seated at the far end of the long mahogany table, isolated. The conversation flowed around him, deliberately excluding him. They spoke of new acquisitions, of society gossip, of upcoming travel plans, a world he was no longer a part of. He ate mechanically, the exquisite food tasting like ash in his mouth. It was over dessert that Marcus delivered the killing blow, leaning back in his chair with an air of magnanimous authority. "Look, Liam," he began, loud enough for the entire table to hear. "Mom and I have been talking. We can't have my sister living in reduced circumstances, and we can't have you unemployed. It's a bad look." Liam placed his fork down gently. He looked at Marcus, then at Eleanor, who was nodding in agreement. Sarah was staring intently at her plate, refusing to meet his eyes. The silent enabler. "So," Marcus continued, enjoying the moment, "we've decided to make you an offer. We have a junior project manager opening in the residential division. It's mostly overseeing townhouse renovations. Nothing too complicated. It's beneath you, I know, but it's a steady paycheck. It'll keep a roof over your heads. A smaller roof, obviously, until you get back on your feet. Consider it charity." The room fell silent. The offer was a masterstroke of cruelty disguised as generosity. It was a demotion, a neutering. He, the award-winning architect, was being offered a pity job overseeing cookie-cutter renovations, a position usually given to recent college graduates. They weren't offering a hand up, they were offering a leash. They wanted to own him, to make him a salaried dependent, a constant, walking reminder of their superiority. Liam felt a cold, clear rage crystallize in his chest, but his face remained a mask of weary gratitude. He took a slow sip of water, letting the silence stretch. He could feel their eyes on him, waiting for him to break, to argue, or to gratefully accept the scraps from their table. He looked across the table at Sarah. Her expression was unreadable, but he saw the slight tremor in her hand as she lifted her wineglass. She was ashamed. But was she ashamed of her family's cruelty or of his spectacular fall from grace? He knew the answer. Finally he spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "That's very generous of you, Marcus. Eleanor, I appreciate you thinking of me." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I'll need to consider it, of course. There's a lot to wrap up with the firm's dissolution." Marcus beamed, a triumphant glint in his eye. He thought he'd won. He thought he had broken him. Of course, take your time. The offer stands. We take care of family." As he spoke, Liam's phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it, but he knew who it was. It was a text from Mr. Harrison's personal assistant. The final contracts for the Apex Constructors entity had been signed. The initial multi-million-dollar funding tranche had been wired. While they were offering him a job supervising townhouses, he had just been handed the keys to a kingdom. He slid his hand into his other pocket, his fingers closing around the cool brass of the single, symbolic key. He could feel its sharp edges pressing into his palm. The weight was a comfort. It was a promise. Their charity was a cage, but he was holding the key to a skyscraper. The humiliation was almost complete. The preparation, however, was done. The storm was about to break. The week that followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare, with Liam as its sole, silent combatant. He played the part of the broken man to perfection. He woke up late, wandered the house in a daze, and fielded imaginary calls from angry creditors, his voice a convincing mix of desperation and defeat. Sarah, meanwhile, had fully transitioned into the role of a woman disentangling herself from a bad investment. She had real estate agents traipse through their home, their critical eyes scanning the spaces Liam had so lovingly designed. They spoke in hushed tones about market realities and staging for a quick sale. Sarah would nod along, discussing commission rates and closing costs, her voice devoid of emotion. She never consulted him. She never asked for his opinion. It was no longer their home. It was her asset to be liquidated. "The agent thinks we should list it 20% below market for a fast sale," she announced one evening, not looking up from her laptop where she was browsing listings for smaller, more appropriate apartments for herself. "We can't afford to carry the mortgage for another month." "The mortgage is paid off, Sarah," Liam said quietly. He had paid off the house 2 years ago, a fact he'd thought would bring her a sense of security. She finally looked at him, her expression one of annoyance. "Don't be difficult, Liam. That was with money that we now know you didn't really have. It was all tied to the firm's credit. The bank will claw it back. My father's lawyers explained it to me. The point is, we need the cash." It was a lie, a complete fabrication fed to her by her family to justify seizing control. The house was in both their names, bought and paid for with his legitimate earnings, completely insulated from his business. Her willingness to believe the lie, to use it against him, was the deepest cut yet. It was a betrayal not just of their marriage, but of basic trust. This was the third and final humiliation. The act of erasing him not just from her future, but from their shared past. "If you think it's best to sell, then we'll sell," he said, the words tasting like poison. He would let her do it. He would let her sell the very foundation beneath her feet, not knowing he had already built a fortress for himself. He retreated to his study. That night, he wasn't making secret calls or reviewing blueprints. He was simply sitting in the dark, the silence a heavy blanket. This was the quiet before the storm. He looked out the window at the city lights, a glittering tapestry of human ambition. For years, he'd wanted to add his own bright thread to that tapestry, and he had. The Harrison Tower would not just be a thread, it would be a landmark, a beacon. He thought about the progression of the last few days, the cold disappointment after his announcement, the public shaming at her family's dinner table, and now the methodical erasure of their shared life. He had wanted to know the truth, and the truth had been delivered with brutal clarity. They had judged him, condemned him, and were now disposing of the remains. There was no love left here. There was no loyalty. There was only the cold calculus of status and appearance. He felt a pang of sorrow for the woman he had married, the woman who had gotten lost somewhere along the way, subsumed by her family's toxic values. But the sorrow was quickly replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He had set this in motion not for revenge, but for truth. Now that he had the truth, justice had to follow. Not a cruel, vindictive justice, but a clear, irrefutable rebalancing of the scales. He pulled the brass key from his pocket and set it on the desk in front of him. It gleamed faintly in the moonlight. Tomorrow. Tomorrow he would invite them to witness the final act of his failure. And they would come, smug and victorious, to watch him sign his own corporate death certificate. They would have no idea they were actually attending the christening of his triumph and the funeral of their arrogance. The next morning, Liam approached Sarah as she was on the phone with a moving company. He waited until she hung up. "Sarah," he said, his voice calm and steady, "I have one last thing I need to do." She sighed, annoyed by the interruption. "What is it, Liam?" "The lawyers have called a final meeting to dissolve the company's remaining assets and sign the bankruptcy papers. It's this afternoon." He paused, letting the fabricated weight of the moment settle. "I know this is a lot to ask, but I'd like it if you were there, for moral support. Maybe your mother and Marcus, too. They've been so concerned. I feel like they deserve to see the final chapter close." A flicker of suspicion crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced by a look of weary obligation. To her, it must have sounded like the pathetic request of a man desperate for an audience to his own demise. It was a chance for them to have a front-row seat to his ultimate defeat, to confirm their judgment of him was correct. It was an irresistible invitation. "You want my mother and brother at your bankruptcy signing?" she asked, incredulous. "I think it's important for them to be there," Liam said, his gaze unwavering. "As a family, to close this chapter together so we can all move on." She considered it for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, Liam, I'll call them. They'll come. Where is it?" He gave her the address. It wasn't his old office or a lawyer's firm. It was the executive conference room on the 40th floor of the city's most prestigious downtown office building, a neutral territory he had booked specifically for this occasion. It had a sweeping view of the city, including the vacant lot where the Harrison Tower was slated to be built. "I'll meet you there," he said. "I have a few things to take care of first." He walked away, leaving her to make the call. He could already hear the smug satisfaction in Marcus's voice, the grim finality in Eleanor's. They would come to see him fall. They would come to witness the end. Liam arrived first. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the conference room, a vast, empty space furnished only with a long, polished obsidian table and a dozen black leather chairs. The view was breathtaking. The city spread out below him, a living organism of concrete, glass, and light. He could see the site, a cleared expanse of earth waiting expectantly. His sight. He felt a strange sense of calm. The anger and the hurt had receded, replaced by a crystalline clarity. He was no longer the defendant, he was the judge. The room was his courtroom. He heard the elevator ding and turned as Sarah, Eleanor, and Marcus entered. They paused at the doorway, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and condescension. They took in the expensive room, the stunning view. "Quite the venue for a bankruptcy, Liam," Marcus said with a sneer, striding into the room as if he owned it. "Going out with a bang?" "I thought the occasion warranted a certain level of gravity," Liam replied smoothly, gesturing for them to sit. Eleanor glided to a chair at the opposite end of the table from where Liam stood, a position of clear opposition. Sarah sat beside her, her posture rigid. Marcus took a seat next to his mother, leaning back with a proprietary air. They looked like a tribunal, ready to pass sentence. So, let's get this over with, Eleanor said, her voice sharp. We have a viewing for a new apartment for Sarah this afternoon. We can't be here all day. Of course, Liam said. I'm just waiting for one more person. He's essential to the proceedings. Marcus scoffed. Who? Your bankruptcy lawyer? The repo man? Just then the door opened again. A distinguished, silver-haired man in an impeccably tailored suit walked in. He had an air of quiet, immense authority. It was Robert Harrison, the CEO of Harrison Global. The shift in the room was instantaneous. Marcus, who had been slouched in his chair, sat bolt upright. Eleanor's serene mask of composure cracked, a flicker of genuine shock in her eyes. Sarah's face went pale. Mr. Harrison, Marcus stammered, scrambling to his feet. He extended a hand, which Harrison briefly shook without enthusiasm. Marcus Vance, what a surprise to see you here. I've been trying to get on your calendar for months. Mr. Vance, Harrison said, his tone polite but cool. He then turned his full attention to Liam, and his expression warmed instantly. Liam, good to see you. Sorry I'm a few minutes late. The traffic from the airfield was thicker than expected. Not a problem at all, Robert. Thank you for coming, Liam said, shaking his hand warmly. Please, have a seat. Harrison took the chair at the head of the table, the seat of power, a position Liam had deliberately left open. The Vances watched this exchange with stunned disbelief. This was not the dynamic they had expected. Liam, the failure, was greeting one of the most powerful men in the country with the easy familiarity of a trusted colleague. I don't understand, Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. What is Mr. Harrison doing here? I thought you lost his project. Liam finally turned his gaze back to his wife and her family. He let the silence hang for a moment, enjoying the confusion on their faces. The chess match had begun, and he had just placed their king in check. Oh, I don't think lost is the right word, Sarah, Liam said, his voice calm and measured. He walked over to the head of the table and laid a thick, bound document in front of Mr. Harrison. In fact, Robert was just flying in from Zurich to sign the final funding agreement. Harrison opened the document, uncapped a pen, and signed his name with a flourish. He then slid the document across the polished table toward Liam. Congratulations, Liam, Harrison said, his voice resonating in the silent room. Apex Constructors is officially a go. I have never been more confident in a project or the architect leading it. The Harrison Tower is going to be your masterpiece. The statement landed. Simple, devastating, final. The blood drained from Eleanor's face. Marcus stared, his mouth slightly agape, looking back and forth between the signed contract and Liam's impassive face. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost not only speak, but purchase the building he was haunting. Sarah was the one who finally found her voice. Apex Constructors? What are you talking about? Your firm was Sterling Design. You said it was bankrupt. You said the Harrison project was gone. Her voice was a mixture of confusion and a dawning, horrifying suspicion. Liam looked directly at her, his eyes holding no anger, only a profound and weary sadness. Sterling Design was the firm I built with my passion, Sarah. I thought it was our dream, but I realized that for you and your family, it was just a measure of my worth, a line on a balance sheet. So I decided to conduct an experiment. I wanted to see what would happen if that balance sheet went to zero. He began to pace slowly in front of the window, his silhouette framed against the sky. He was no longer the defendant. He was the prosecutor, laying out his case. I told you my business had failed, a complete fiction, but a believable one. And I watched. I listened. He paused and his eyes met Sarah's. I heard your phone call to your mother, Sarah, the one where you said I'd flown too close to the sun and worried about what your friends at the club would think. Sarah flinched as if struck. Her hand went to her mouth, this time not in a theatrical gesture, but in genuine horror. He then turned his gaze to Eleanor and Marcus. I sat at your dinner table and endured your pity and your scorn. You called my life's work quaint, a catastrophe, and then you offered me charity. He stopped in front of Marcus, whose face had turned a blotchy red. A junior project manager, wasn't it? Overseeing townhouse renovations. A steady paycheck to keep me from embarrassing the family. Liam reached into his jacket pocket, but instead of the brass key, he pulled out a slim portfolio. He opened it on the table. It was the financial overview for Apex Constructors and the Harrison Tower project. The Harrison Tower is a $1.2 billion project, Liam stated, his voice ringing with quiet authority. My firm, Apex, is not just the designer. We are the primary construction management group, in partnership with Mr. Harrison. My personal compensation from this project alone will be more than Vance Holdings' entire net worth. The air was sucked out of the room. Mr. Harrison sat watching, his expression unreadable but for a glint of what might have been respect in his eyes. He was the unexpected ally, the silent, powerful witness to this methodical dismantling. But that's not the most interesting part, Liam continued, his voice dropping to an almost conversational tone. He looked directly at Marcus. Your offer of a job was particularly insulting, Marcus, so I had my financial team do a little digging. It turns out Vance Holdings' residential division, your little kingdom, has been struggling. You're over-leveraged on 3 major suburban developments, and you were counting on winning the supply contract for the new municipal center to stay solvent, weren't you? Marcus's face went from red to ashen gray. He knew where this was going. The winning bid for that contract wasn't Vance Holdings, Liam said. It was a smaller, more agile company called Keystone Materials. They came in just under your bid and offered superior product. A company I acquired through a holding firm 3 months ago. The moral mirror was now firmly in place, forcing them to see the reflection of their own predatory tactics. And those 3 suburban developments, Liam went on, relentless. Your primary supplier for specialized timber and framing just invoked a termination clause in your contract. A clause my lawyers pointed out to them. That supplier has now signed an exclusive and very lucrative deal with Apex Constructors for the Harrison Tower project. Your projects are dead in the water, Marcus. You have no materials. Your company is hemorrhaging money. The pity job you offered me? That position won't exist in a month because the entire division is about to be insolvent. The reversal of fortune was absolute. The ones who had offered him charity were now on the verge of needing it themselves. The grand, powerful Vance family brought to the brink of ruin not by a hostile takeover, but by the quiet, strategic mind of the man they had dismissed as a quaint artist. Eleanor, for the first time in her life, looked utterly defeated. The icy composure had melted away, revealing a panicked, desperate woman. Why, Liam? She whispered, her voice trembling. Why would you do this? Liam finally stopped pacing. He stood at the head of the table, across from Mr. Harrison. He looked at the 3 of them, the architects of his humiliation, now trapped in the rubble of their own arrogance. You ask, why? He said, his voice no longer cold, but filled with a righteous fire. Because for 6 years you treated me as less. You measured my worth in dollars and status, and always found me wanting. You saw my passion as a novelty, and my success as a threat. You never saw me. You saw a stepping stone for your daughter, an accessory to your brand. He then picked up the thick, signed contract from the table. This, he said, holding it up, is not about money. It's about respect. The respect you demanded but never gave. The respect I earned, while you were all busy inheriting yours. He let the document drop back to the table with a soft, final thud. The sound echoed in the crushing silence of the room. The quiet bomb had detonated, and the shockwave had leveled their entire world. The immediate aftermath was a tableau of shattered arrogance. Marcus stared at the contract on the table as if it were a venomous snake, his mind furiously trying to calculate the scale of the disaster Liam had just unveiled. His entire professional identity, built on the swagger of his family's name, had been demolished in under 10 minutes. Eleanor, for her part, was attempting to reassemble her formidable composure, but the pieces no longer fit. Her face was a mask of forced calm, but her eyes darted around the room, searching for an angle, a way to regain control where there was none left. The queen had been deposed, and she didn't know how to exist as anything else. Sarah was the one who broke the silence. She pushed her chair back, the sound scraping harshly in the quiet room, and stood up. She looked at Liam, her eyes wide with a desperate, pleading light. "Liam, I didn't know," she stammered. "You have to believe me. I didn't know any of this." "That's the point, Sarah," Liam replied, his voice softening, but not with forgiveness. It was the softness of pity. "You didn't know. You never once thought to ask. You never once believed that I might be more than what your family judged me to be. When you thought I had nothing, you didn't stand with me. You stood with them. You calculated your losses and started liquidating the assets, including our life together." "That's not fair," she cried, tears finally beginning to stream down her cheeks. "I was scared. I was trying to be practical." "You were trying to save yourself," Liam corrected her gently. "You were protecting your status, your comfort, your reputation. You weren't protecting us. There is no us to protect when one partner is already halfway out the door, calling a moving company while the other is supposedly grieving." He saw a flash of shame in her eyes as he mentioned the movers. The list of grievances was not just a weapon, it was a mirror, and she was being forced to look at her own reflection. At this point, Mr. Harrison quietly stood up. "Liam," he said, placing a hand on his shoulder, "my work here is done. This seems like a private, family matter. I'll see you at the site on Monday morning. Congratulations again. You've earned this." He gave a curt, dismissive nod to the Vances and walked out of the room, his departure sucking the last ounce of external authority from them, leaving them alone with the man they had so grievously underestimated. Once the door closed, Eleanor found her voice again, shifting her strategy from shock to desperate negotiation. "Liam, listen to me. What's done is done. You've made your point. You're a brilliant man, we see that now. We were wrong. But this attack on our company, it's unnecessary. We're family. We can work something out. A merger, a partnership. Vance Holdings and Apex Constructors. Together we could be unstoppable." It was so predictable, so perfectly in character. Her apology was not for her behavior, but for her miscalculation. Her solution was not remorse, but a new business deal. Liam almost laughed. "A partnership? Eleanor, you just spent a week treating me like a piece of dirt on your shoe. You offered me a pity job. Now that you know I hold the cards, you want to be partners? My respect isn't for sale. It's not a commodity you can acquire when it's convenient." He then turned to Marcus, who was still speechless. "And you, Marcus, you wanted me to come play with the big boys. Well, here we are. How does it feel?" Marcus finally looked up, his face a mess of fury and humiliation. "You son of a—" "Don't," Liam cut him off, his voice dropping to an icy calm. "Don't you dare. You have no high ground here. You built your career on your family's name, on bullying and intimidation. You never built a single thing of value yourself. Your company is about to collapse because you were too arrogant to see the ground crumbling beneath your own feet. Don't blame me for holding up a mirror to your incompetence." He let that sink in, then his gaze fell, finally and fully, on his wife. The anger dissipated, leaving only the vast, empty space of what was lost. He walked over to her. He reached into his pocket, and this time, he pulled out the single brass key. He didn't hand it to her. He held it in his open palm. "This was going to be for us," he said, his voice thick with the ghost of a future that would never be. "This is the key to the penthouse I bought, overlooking the new tower. I imagined us standing on the balcony, watching our dream rise from the ground." Sarah stared at the key, her tears falling onto his hand. She reached for it, her fingers trembling. Liam, we can fix this. Please. I love you. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I was weak and I let them influence me. But I love you. He looked at her, searching her face for the woman he had fallen in love with 6 years ago. He saw her, a flicker of her, buried under years of accumulated vanity and fear. But it wasn't enough. I believe that you believe that right now, Sarah, he said softly. But love isn't a feeling you have when things are good. It's an action you take when things are hard. And when things got hard, or when you thought they got hard, your actions spoke volumes. You chose them. You chose status. You chose appearances. He closed his hand around the key for a moment, then gently placed it in her palm. Her fingers closed around it. For a heart-stopping second, she thought it was an act of reconciliation. That key doesn't open the door to our future anymore, he said, his voice devastatingly quiet. It opens the door to your choice. That house you were so eager to sell? I'm signing it over to you. It's yours, unencumbered. You won't be left with nothing. Your family, well, they will have to face the consequences of their own actions. He took a step back, creating a physical distance that mirrored the emotional chasm between them. You have a choice to make, Sarah. You can stay with them in the ruins of the empire they built on arrogance, or you can start over, alone, and figure out who you are without their name, without their money, and without me. He turned and walked towards the door, leaving the three of them standing in the opulent conference room that had become their judgment chamber. Sarah looked at the key in her hand, then at her mother and brother, their faces pale and drawn. Then she looked at Liam's retreating back. Liam, wait, she called out, her voice cracking with desperation. He paused at the door, his hand on the handle, but he didn't turn around. The choice is yours, Sarah, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room. For the first time in your life, it's truly yours. And then he walked out, closing the door softly behind him. He left them in the silence, with the signed contract on the table, the key in Sarah's hand, and the full, crushing weight of their choices. The weeks that followed were a study in consequences. The news of Vance Holdings' sudden and catastrophic financial trouble rippled through the city's business community. The failure of their residential division was swift and brutal. Marcus, stripped of his bravado, was forced into a series of humiliating negotiations, selling off assets at a fraction of their value to cover the company's debts. The man who had sneered at Liam's catastrophe was now presiding over a real one, his name becoming a cautionary tale in the very clubs where he once held court. Eleanor retreated from public life. The society pages that had once breathlessly chronicled her every move now only mentioned her in whispers. Another fallen titan. The estate, once a symbol of her power, became her gilded cage. The invitations stopped coming. The fawning calls ceased. She was left with her mahogany-paneled library and the silence of her own misjudgment. Liam, meanwhile, moved into his penthouse. The space was vast and empty at first, but he slowly began to fill it not with expensive art, but with things that held meaning for him. Architectural models of his favorite historical buildings, a drafting table overlooking the city, shelves filled with books on philosophy and design. He poured his energy into the Harrison Tower. The groundbreaking ceremony was a major city event. He stood at the podium, not with the arrogance of a conqueror, but with the quiet gratitude of a creator. He spoke of his vision for the building, of community, of creating a legacy of beauty and function for the city. He never once mentioned the Vances or his personal drama. His triumph was his statement. He needed no other. He had minimal contact with Sarah. His lawyers handled the transfer of the house deed. He heard through a mutual acquaintance that she had not, in fact, sold it. She was living there alone, the cavernous, minimalist space now a constant reminder of what she had lost. She didn't stay with her mother at the estate. She had, it seemed, taken his final words to heart and made a choice to separate herself from her family's toxic orbit. About a month after the confrontation, she called him. He let it go to voicemail. "Liam, it's me." Her recorded voice was small, hesitant. I, I just wanted to say, you were right, about everything. I've been doing a lot of thinking. Living here alone, seeing my family for what they are. I see it all now. I see what I became. I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I know." She paused. "The house, thank you. It was more than I deserved. I hope you're happy, Liam. I really do." He listened to the message 3 times. He felt a pang of the old affection, a sorrow for the good years they'd had before the corrosion of her family's values had eaten away at their foundation. But he didn't call her back. Forgiveness was one thing, reconciliation was another. The trust, once so completely shattered, was like a rare piece of glass. Even if you could glue the pieces back together, the cracks would always be visible, a permanent testament to the break. Some things, once broken, could never be made whole again. He focused on his work, on his team. He built Apex Constructors into a firm known not just for its brilliant designs, but for its integrity. He treated his employees with respect, fostered their creativity, and shared the fruits of their collective success. He was building the kind of company, the kind of life he had always envisioned. But this time, it was on a foundation of solid rock, not the shifting sands of others' approval. One evening, months later, he stood on the balcony of his penthouse. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Below, the skeleton of the Harrison Tower was beginning to rise, a testament to his vision and his resilience. He held no anger towards Sarah or her family anymore. They were just footnotes in his story, the antagonists in a chapter that was now closed. Their downfall had not brought him joy, only a grim sense of satisfaction that the world had righted itself. He thought about the nature of strength. Eleanor and Marcus believed strength was about dominance, about displaying wealth and power. They were a fortress with high walls and visible cannons, but their foundation was hollow. True strength, he now understood, was internal. It was patience. It was integrity. It was knowing your own worth so completely that the judgment of others became irrelevant noise. It was the strength of a deep, unseen root system that could withstand any storm. He had been underestimated, and that had been his greatest weapon. They had looked at his quiet passion and mistaken it for weakness. They had looked at his small firm and mistaken it for a lack of ambition. They never thought to look deeper. They never understood that the most powerful forces are often the ones you cannot see. The story of Liam Sterling and the Vance family became a quiet legend in their city. It wasn't a tale of revenge, but one of poetic justice. It was a story about a man who had to stage the demolition of his own life to discover its true foundation, and in the process built an empire while his detractors were left sifting through the rubble of their own making. He had lost a wife, but he had found himself. And in the end, he realized that was the only merger that truly mattered. And so, Liam's story comes to a close. It's a powerful reminder that true value isn't in the car you drive, the house you own, or the name you carry. It's in your character, your integrity, and the quiet strength you show when the world is testing you. It's about building your life on a foundation of self-respect that no one can ever take away. I have a question for all of you watching. Do you think Sarah deserved a second chance? Should Liam have taken her call and tried to rebuild what they lost? Or was he right to walk away for good? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is what makes this community so special. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next one. Your support means the world. Until next time, remember to know your worth.